Welcome back to the Code, everybody. Dr. Andrew Fix here, joining you, standing inside one of our locations here at Physio Room. You know that's where I'm from. And I'm super pumped to bring another awesome interview conversation to you guys here on the Code. However, you're tuning in, listening to this podcast, really, really appreciate your time tuning in, whatever method you're doing that. I've got my buddy Jason Griffing here with us. Jason is the founder of a men's group here in the South Denver area called Pillars of Impact. And he and I have been meeting and spending time there over the past several months. And I'm just super excited to have you here. Jason, thanks for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Now, I know I was, not necessarily quick because I knew about it and chose not to come, but I found out about Pillars of Impact after it had been going for a little while. So, could you do me and the listeners of this show a brief favor and just introduce yourself more thoroughly? Tell us about you, and then let's get into like where did this idea for this group, Pillars of Impact, come from?
Yeah. Happy to do that. So, as you said, my name's Jason Griffing. I live here in the Denver area. I am a father of two amazing children. I've got a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. A devoted husband, a busy professional, like many of us in the group, and really just was looking for ways with the Pillars of Impact idea to connect with other like-minded people in the area. So I'm big on personal development and growth, and ultimately I think about this a lot in that we get to this phase of our lives. Most of us are kind of somewhere in that 30 to 50 range, kind of middle age. And it's a phase of life where I think it's really fundamentally important, actually, arguably one of the most important phases of our lives to have connections and strong networks because we need that support. But on the other side of things, it's also the phase of life where it's like the most difficult to create those relationships because we're getting pulled, in so many different directions between kids and work and everything like that. So ultimately, the idea behind Pillars of Impact was to create an environment that would be conducive to helping people like myself and you and others in a similar sort of phase of their lives to come together and connect around, important topics. So we focus a lot of our time and energy on talking about things like parenting, like marriage, career and vocation, health and wellness, all of these topics that are really, kind of important to leading an impactful and fulfilling life. So it's been a great mission so far, and we've just been at it for a little over a year, and there's been really strong growth in the group, and I'm very excited, to see how it's coming along and to have you as part of the group as well. It's been great.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, I agree. The handful of meetings or meetups that I've been able to attend, I thought it's been awesome. One, obviously, a great way to just meet people that you probably wouldn't have met otherwise, and meeting them in a way where like you're both choosing your whoever it is meeting each other, like you're choosing to come to this place where the entire goal is to connect and get to know other people. It's not like you just you showed up at the same park or something and you happened to be there playing with your kids and you stumbled upon meeting somebody, but like you went there with the intention to connect with, to share some personal stories, to hear and listen to other people. And it kind of opens up a nice environment, like you said, to allow for that connection. Prior to starting Pillars, had you ever participated in a group similar to this before?
Yeah. So I had participated in one or two other groups, and they were faith-based. So when I initially sort of set out to find some sort of a group like this where I could connect, because to your point, like you said, when you get into this phase of life, a lot of the relationships that you build with other adults are the sort of byproduct of like your kids' friends at school or your kids' sporting events and things like that. And those are great. I have some meaningful relationships that have stemmed from those parts of my lives, but they're not quite the same level of depth necessarily that I'm looking for. And they can also come and go very easily when your kids' activities change, or maybe your kids have a falling out with one of their friends, and so that relationship kind of goes by the wayside. So was looking for alternatives and ways to create, like you said, some of those more meaningful, deeper connections. And ultimately, to your question, I did go out and experiment with a couple of existing groups. Like I said, all I could really find was faith-based groups. And while I deeply respect the mission of those groups and I think they're wonderful, they weren't really my jam. I'm not particularly religious, and I was looking for something a little bit more secular, so a little more focused on like those topics that I mentioned of just the here and now of parenting and marriage and all of these other things that come along with just trying to be an effective man and an effective father in today's world. And so ultimately, I was having actually a quite a difficult time finding anything like that that was not rooted in faith. And that was one of, amongst other reasons, one of the big reasons why I went and started this group, to have that alternative.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's so common where like typically the people that we meet once you are in your primary adult phase of your life, like you're done with high school, if you went to college, now you're done with college, you're out in the working world, maybe you have kids, maybe you don't. It's like, well, where do you meet people? You're going to meet them at wherever you work, right? A lot of people work from home now, so maybe they're not even having as many interactions with people in and out of the office or the store or wherever it is that their work is. Or like you said, through activities with your kids or something like that. Or unless you're part of some sort of activity, whether that's like a rec sports league or you're part of a pickleball club or like whatever it is, like if you're unless you're going out to meet people, I feel like especially in this technologically advanced world where we've kind of like jumped forward after 2020 and we all experienced COVID over 2020 and 2021, it's like it feels harder to meet people now than it did before because so much of our world is dominated, just like we're here on a Zoom call doing a podcast. But like unless you're making the intention to go out and interact with other people, it's kind of easy to find yourself not having that experience on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's definitely been my experience. You get out of college and you start to get busy and eventually you get married, you have kids, and slowly but surely your social circle kind of whittles down just as a byproduct of that. And then there's a whole work from home dynamic. I know a lot of people, they started that around COVID, like you mentioned. I personally have worked from home full time for a little over 8 years. So it's been a long time. I love it. But there's a sort of side effect of that work from home environment where, again, it just further contributes to this kind of atrophying of your social network.
Yeah.
And ultimately, things like sports and recreational like pickleball leagues and things like that that you mentioned can be a great platform for going out, and meeting new people. But ultimately, though, those can be sort of limiting too, right? You're only meeting sort of certain people that are into that very specific activity. And I think one of the great things about Pillars of Impact that I've seen is just that it does create that platform. It creates that impetus or that motivation for people to get out a couple of times a month and connect. And we get gentlemen from all different walks of life, various physical fitness levels and activities and interests and demographics and all sort of coming together around these very universal themes of
Yeah.
what does it mean to be a man in today's world? What does it mean to be a good father, a good husband, a good provider? What does it mean to pursue a fulfilling vocation and navigate all of the craziness with career and profession that's going on these days? So these are very universal topics, but you really need that kind of platform or that driving force to sort of get these events on the calendar, right? And bring people
Yeah.
together. And that's been one of the really cool things about the group.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm grateful that you decided to start it and have opened it up and welcomed it to so many people in the community. You've already started to mention this, but let's roll through them. Like, what are the now? And granted, we're talking about men. This could very easily apply to women as well, or anyone else. But what are the six pillars in the main categories of things that we spend our time primarily talking about at
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, like when I was originally starting the group, I was like, as I was creating the web page and thinking through the topics, I'm like, this really doesn't necessarily need to be limited to men. I did decide to make it a men's group because I do think there are some very unique aspects to, again, being a man in today's world and some of those dynamics. And specifically, I should mention actually, the group is very targeted at fathers,
Yeah.
specifically, not just men in general, right? But there's just a certain set of constraints and limitations that we deal with as fathers that I think are are kind of a binding force for the group, and you need to have some of that cohesion. But ultimately, yeah, the six pillars of the group are parenting, marriage, wealth, mindset, fitness, and vocation. And again, so those are very universal topics that I think every father out there is kind of thinking about, with parenting, like how can I be the most effective father possible? With marriage, like how can I, through all of the chaos and all of the responsibilities and things that are putting pressure on my relationship with my partner, how can I develop and maintain a really strong and healthy foundation in that marriage? Wealth, obviously, being a provider as a father, and that's again not unique to fathers. There are many mothers out there as well who are going out and earning for the family. So again, not necessarily unique to men, but a big part of what we think about as fathers is how to provide for our families and how to set up that stability and that financial security for the
Absolutely.
family. Mindset is a big one, having the mental tool set to navigate this world. Fitness, which I know is one that's huge for you, and many of our members are actively involved in the fitness world, which is great to have. And then vocation, and I chose that word very specifically, right? We all have jobs and careers, but like ideally we want that job or career to be a vocation, meaning like a real calling, something that we find true meaning and purpose in our work. So at a high level, those are the topics that we focus on.
Yeah, and with that word vocation, I mean, we even see this in the group. There are some people who are doing quite well working in their job or career, but they're in the process of trying to build something else on the side that aligns more truly with like where their passion is, and that might be in a totally different field or a different avenue compared to what their actual career is now. Um, I think, I was listening to a podcast earlier, or actually, I guess this was an audiobook. It was a podcast and then an audiobook kind of on the same topic. And one of the things that they were talking about is this concept of like setting boundaries and trying to have balance. And we have these six different pillars that you just listed off: parenting, marriage, wealth, mindset, fitness, and vocation. And I think we see this in the group when we meet on a monthly or a couple times a month basis, that it is really hard for all of us to try to be in perfect alignment or in perfect balance in these six different categories at any given point in time. We see some people in the group might be really knocking it out of the park in one or two of those, but they might be sort of struggling in one or two other ones, and they might feel like they're kind of in the middle on the other two. But there's like seasons to it where we go around the horn and we talk there in the group, and some people are having struggles or successes in one category, whereas someone else might be the exact opposite. So, in your experience, having two kids and being the founder of this group and participating in it longer than me, speak to that for a minute. Like, how have you sort of seen how the guys that come and share their stories and whatnot, like work through these different seasons of life
Hmm.
where they sort of go through these ups and downs in the different categories.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And actually, one of the first comments I'll make there is more directed at the setup of your question, which is this reality that like all of us are juggling a lot, right? And ultimately, what I find really refreshing about this sort of group when you come together, especially when we're able to meet in person, which is the vast majority of our meetings, is you get this kind of real dose of like true connection, and you get to actually really see behind the curtain a little bit, I would say, of people's lives and what they're working on. And I've found that to be a really refreshing antidote to all of the pressure that a lot of us feel with social media these days. Because when you go on social media, ultimately what you're seeing is everybody's highlight reel, right? There are very few people going on to Facebook or Instagram or X and posting, pictures or posts about something that they're really struggling with.
Mhm.
Typically, they're going on there to share like the great things that are happening in their lives. And so you're seeing everybody else's highlight reel.
Yeah.
Meantime, in your own world, you're completely internalizing all of the things that you're really wrestling with. And an unfortunate element of just human nature is you are also often discounting the areas in your life where you are doing well.
I think
And
that's
so,
a very, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I think
yeah,
that's
no, no, go
an
ahead.
important part to bring up. The way we are wired as human beings is like you said, is to see the things that need to be fixed or to see the things that are going wrong. And it's like a protective mechanism that we're completely wired that way. So it is very easy, like you said, to discount or not acknowledge the things that are going really well in your own life or the things that you're doing very well. It's much easier to point out, oh, this living room is a mess, or I forgot to do this, or I didn't work out yesterday, or whatever the topic might be. It's very easy to point out the things that are going wrong as opposed to
Yeah.
going right.
Yeah, you get this kind of asymmetry, right? Of like, I'm very locked in on the things that aren't going well in my life, and I'm seeing all of the things that are going incredibly well in everybody else's life. And that can be like a really negative spiral and further kind of isolating factor, I feel like, in our lives.
Totally.
And so ultimately, coming together as a group and really just sharing and like you said, being vulnerable and being open about like, we like to start every roundtable meeting that we have with go around the horn and share, something good that's happening in your life right now. Like what's a recent win? And I think those are awesome things to share. But then when we get into the meat of the meeting, it's often about what's something that you're working on, what's an area that you're feeling stuck, how can the group sort of support you, and just having the opportunity to hear from others about, where they're struggling can really just be refreshing. It can be very cathartic for that person to be able to share and receive support from their peers, but also just as being somebody there to listen and observe, you really get a better perspective on the reality of the world, which is that, we're all kind of in this messy place of trying to figure out life and navigate all of these different factors and keeping all these different plates spinning. And so, ultimately, some of the ways that we try to, I guess, be supportive of that and work on that, kind of integrate that struggle into the group is through these just recurring meetings, having those opportunities to connect and talk about it. But also, we've implemented just over the last couple of quarters something that we call the personal pillars framework, which is a kind of a 90-day planning framework. So it was a bit of a realization that I had when I was going through a quarterly planning session at work. And it sort of dawned on me that, like, we do this every 90 days. We bring our leadership team together. We talk about what's working. We talk about what isn't.
Mhm.
And we set some commitments and we set an intention for the next 90 days. What are we really going to go focus on? What is the most important thing that we need to work on? And it occurred to me that I didn't really have like a parallel to that in my personal life, which seemed a little crazy when I stopped and thought about it. So in addition to just coming together on a regular cadence, we also do this kind of quarterly goal setting where we come together and set these personal pillars, like we call them, that are sort of 90-day goals that we help kind of keep each other accountable to throughout the quarter. So that's been really effective as well.
Yeah, and hearing you say that, and we've talked about this before, we do the exact same thing here at our office at Physio Room. Like we operate our small business here on a system that's called the EOS model,
Yep.
Entrepreneurial Operating System. And there's a pretty popular book called Traction that kind of goes through that. If any of you do own small businesses or work in small businesses, and that's one of the major pieces of it is these 90-day stints, these 90-day goals and meetings that we
Yeah.
have.
Rocks, right?
Yeah, set your rocks. Yep, the
Yep.
rocks for the quarter. And what are you going to work towards? How are you going to achieve those rocks? And then at 90 days, you reassess and you redo it. Because it's really hard to set like some big goal, like for the year, for example. And then if you don't continue to revisit that and revisit the steps of how you're going to get there, what are the chances that you're actually going to achieve that goal at
Yeah.
the end of
Yeah.
the year?
It
Not
goes it
very,
goes out of focus.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, you kind of lose sight of it. And we run EOS at the company I work at as well, so I'm very familiar with that. And one of the things they talk about in that framework is just the kind of forcing function that these rituals will play. So having weekly leadership meetings, having these quarterly planning sessions, these are opportunities that we've all experienced it. It's like, okay, I've got this meeting coming up and oh shoot, I've been totally procrastinating on this task. And so you get this like spike in productivity like leading up to the meeting. And on one hand, you kind of like want to kick yourself a little bit for maybe procrastinating. But on the other, it's like, well, that's just the reality. And sometimes you need some urgency in your life to sort of drive that productivity. And ultimately, this personal pillars framework that we've implemented is again a way to bring some of those ideas over into this personal growth and development sphere. And so, prime example, you and I are recording this on a Tuesday, and we have one of our roundtable meetings tomorrow. And one of the personal pillars that I've set is around strengthening my relationship with my wife And, won't get into the details, but there's a specific task that had been on my list to do that was related to that personal pillar. And just last night, I finally did it because I was like, well, I've got this roundtable meeting coming up with the guys on Wednesday, and I'm going to be asked to sort of speak to what I've done to advance my personal pillar. And I don't want to be sort of standing there with no progress to report.
Yeah.
So just having that group accountability and that shared accountability has been something that I know has been helpful for me personally. And I've heard a lot of feedback from others in the group as well about that.
Yeah, totally. I think you speak to two things right there that are so common. One, not to like call you out, we all do this. Procrastination is a real thing, right? That we all deal with. It's like human nature to procrastinate, to get something done until it's actually pressing, until like you actually have to do it, right? Pretty much nobody takes the trash out when the can's only half full, right? We wait until the
Yep.
can is full, then we take it out. Or you wait until like, oh shoot, it's the morning, it's trash pickup day. I better get those cans out to the curb or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that, as opposed to like 4 p.m. the night before.
Yeah.
But
And I think, sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
I,
you're
I
good.
think like, I kind of said like on one hand, you want to kick yourself, but I do think it's actually important, like you said, to just sort of recognize that it is human nature.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if we like internalize that and we really recognize that about ourselves, we can almost like leverage that to our advantage. So like create deadlines for yourself. If you're the type of person that needs that urgency and that deadline, like make a public commitment, whether it's with a men's group like this or just a friend or a colleague at work. Put yourself on the hook, right? And say, hey, I'm going to have this to you by this date, whatever it is. If you know it's that important project, then you can really like kind of leverage that insight about human nature and about yourself that like we do tend to procrastinate. And so you can sort of do things to like manufacture more urgency and more deadlines in your life to really just keep yourself accountable. And again, like through this group that we have, that's been one way, but there are many other ways that you can do this.
I like what you said, manufacturing urgency. That's a great phrase there, and you're totally right. I mean, if somebody has an idea of something that they want to do, but there's no deadline or no anything associated with it, no actual plan, the likelihood that that's actually going to happen is very small. Versus if you actually put a date down, now whatever it is, like, it could be a fitness goal, it could be I need to go grocery shopping by this time. By Tuesday at 5, we need to go get groceries or whatever, versus just, oh, at some point in the next week I'll stop at the store and pick things up, and then
Yeah.
things hit the fan and your plan goes
Yeah.
away. And the accountability, like you mentioned, hey, we have this group meeting coming up on Wednesday. I don't want to have to stand up and say, guys, I didn't make any progress towards the goal that I set 90 days ago. Um, Having that accountability is so huge, and we see that with the workplace. We see that in the fitness world, like people who exercise and go to the gym, for example, with other people, and they know that they're going to show up at 6 o'clock in the morning. The likelihood that you're going to skip a day is so much smaller when you know that other person's counting on you to show up, and that's your
Yep.
friend that you always train with. So it's yeah,
Yeah, and it's
just an
interesting
accountability.
because like you're so much more willing to kind of sell yourself short or sell out yourself than you are like others, right? So I know this about myself. And so if there's something that I feel like is really important to me, I will often go out of my way to make some sort of public commitment.
Yeah,
It's one thing to put a deadline on paper if I'm the only one who's seen it. It's another thing to go to that friend from my men's group or that boss at work or that colleague and say, "Hey, I'm going to get this to you by this date." And then now I'm on the hook.
yep,
And I know that again, like it's just kind of my nature. And I don't think I'm unique in this regard. I think all of us have some element of this in us where we're just more likely, like you said, if there are other people involved and we want to honor that commitment or be consistent to our word, we're more likely to do that. So again, I think just understanding these things about ourselves and then instead of like lamenting it or kicking yourself about it, like flip that on its head and use it to your advantage
yeah.
is I think a really powerful thing.
Yeah, totally. It is so much easier to let yourself down than to let other people down. And
Yeah.
we mentioned that one of the core elements of this group and like who it's most for is for fathers. And the last people that as fathers we want to let down are our kids, right? It's
Yeah.
like That's like the worst thing in each of our minds is we don't want that to happen. So, speaking of which, I had a question for you. And being in participating and hosting and leading these conversations on a monthly basis, we talked about what the six pillars are. I'm curious, like, if you were to sort of take a bird's eye view and look back over the past 12 plus months of like meetings and whatnot, what are some of the themes without naming any names or anything like that?
Hmm.
But like, what are some of the themes that you've found where where like many of the struggles or many of the challenges that the guys in this group have been dealing with, what are those? What are the
Hmm.
things that you keep hearing over and over? Like every month, it's this same. I keep hearing the same thing because one of the things that I think is really powerful, like you said, is that like behind the curtain look where it's not social media. You're not seeing everybody's highlight reel. You're seeing that other people are dealing with the same stuff
Real life.
in day
Yeah.
out that you're dealing with. It's real life, and you really get a sense of like, I'm not alone here. Like, I'm not alone feeling this way. I'm not alone dealing with this, having this hard time. What are the consistent challenges that you keep hearing that folks are dealing with?
Yeah, yeah, I love that question. I will say that, starting the group coming into it, one of the things I don't want to say worried about, but kind of wondered about was like, is all of the gravity of this group going to pull us to sort of talking about like work and making money? And like, don't get me wrong, I think those things are important. We have pillars around both of them. Like, I think those are hugely important, but I was just basing this on like other social relationships that I have outside of this group. Like a lot of times when men get together, we just want to talk shop. We talk about work. We talk about like, wealth building and things like that's kind of like low hanging fruit, right? I think is why like it's just an easier topic I think to get into. And to my surprise, and I would say in a good way, I have found that it's been a much more balanced than that, just organically. Not we haven't had to make any like concerted effort to get people to like open up a little bit more and get past that low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And the big themes that have emerged, and I'm like really glad you asked this question because this is something I think about a lot, again, in a really positive way, is the amount of times that like we'll go around the horn. Like at our recent personal pillars planning session, I was just struck by like how many of the personal pillars that the men were setting were around like marriage and relationships with kids.
Yeah.
Like those are such common themes that I think it's really important for anybody listening to hear because to your point, like if you're struggling with these things, you're definitely not alone. Like, so number one, huge theme that we hear about all the time, something that I just mentioned that I'm working on as well, is strengthening our relationships with our partners. This is a really challenging thing to do because you get so busy with life and a lot of the humdrum and the responsibilities just sort of take over. And if you're not like mindful and careful about it, you can very easily fall into this pattern where you and your wife are kind of just like partners in this marriage and life thing, but you're not really like, you're losing touch with that friendship and that closeness that brought you together in the first place. So there's been a huge focus on that in the group. And this plays out in a few different ways, but like one of the big examples that we see is like men continually kind of sharing ideas of like, hey, I'm going to set a goal of like doing one date night a week, one date night a month with my wife. And that's a big one. And so sharing ideas of like, hey, what can we do beyond just like going out for dinner? Like, what are people up to? Those kinds of ideas come up a lot. One of the other things that's kind of a subset to that, but can also kind of stand on its own, that a lot of the men talk about is like how to create space for conversation with your partner that is not about kids and work and stuff that needs to get done around the house. So
Yeah.
how can you have like it feels a little forced and manufactured, but like how can you have sort of pre-selected conversation topics for the next time you go out to eat with your wife that can really like steer the conversation in a direction that's deeper, more personal, more about you guys and your relationship than it is about that kind of low-hanging fruit of talking about the kids and talking about all the responsibilities at home.
Yeah.
So those are big things. And then the other one I'll mention is relationships with kids. So there is a really positive and I'd say encouraging theme to see throughout the group of the level of dedication that these fathers have to creating strong relationships with their children and being open with their kids and having that time to connect on a deep level. And I think like that's just such a powerful thing to see because I think there are forces in the world that can kind of conspire in some ways, not like a conspiracy necessarily, but just this sort of combination of forces that can drive men to be a little bit more isolated, maybe a little bit more distant from their kids, be it travel for work or just societal norms around being a little bit more closed off and less open as a man. And what I see in the group is a lot of men who are really, really committed to the idea of having close, meaningful relationships with their kids. And that's just super cool to see. So those are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, totally. And I would agree with you. I think in the conversations I've been a part of, those are the two that stand out to me, especially that marriage category or the relationship with the partner, whoever that is. And I think if I'm remembering back, the last time we set these goals, that was even the category that I focused on. And I'm proud to say that Aaron and I have date night scheduled 2 nights from now. So on Thursday, we've got
Love
date
it.
night on there, and I think it's really easy to come up with ideas that might help, right? To come up with the idea of, oh, I want to go out on one date per month or every other week with my spouse. But actually making sure that that happens is, I think, where the rubber meets the road is where the challenge is. And we talked about setting deadlines to manufacture or create some urgency or stop that procrastination from continuing to go on and on. I think what we find in the group is it just needs to get onto people's calendars, right? It needs to get onto either your own personal calendar, your work calendar, the shared calendar that you might have as a family, like wherever that is, so that you know it's going to happen. And when it's on the calendar, it's going to happen. And then at the very least, it provides the opportunity in the space for, like you said, those deeper conversations. Which, yeah, sometimes you do have to potentially come with some scripted questions that you're going to ask each other or something like that, or some note cards even. And I think sometimes people maybe feel bad about that, or they feel like, oh, why do we have to have this worksheet that we're going through to have like a deep, meaningful conversation? And it's not that you have to have that. It's just that it's so easy and there's so little resistance to falling into the small talk conversations, the talking about work, the talking about the logistics of the kids or this and that. And it takes a little bit of effort to break through that and get to the actual peel those layers of the onion back and get to those deeper levels of conversation. And
Yeah.
then the relationship can
Yeah, there's a
continue.
lot of inertia and momentum, right? Pulling you in the direction of these same old conversations that you have over and over. And there's nothing wrong, of course, with like spending some time talking about your kids or just catching up on things that need to get done around the house. But like you said, having a more intentional approach to it, of having some maybe some guardrails around that, or something to just nudge you in a slightly different direction to have maybe a more meaningful or deeper conversation. And then to your point about like putting it on the calendar, right? I mean, that's a huge thing because you can easily fall into this trap of like, well, when I come up with a good idea for a date night, then we'll go out and do it. And then it just never happens versus, well, it's on the calendar and we're going on a date this Friday or next Friday. So I better figure it out, right? And also, in addition to that, now I've made a commitment to my wife, somebody other than me, that like this is going to happen on this date. And so I'm on the hook for it. I'm also on the hook with the group, with the Pillars of Impact group, of coming back and saying, "Hey, have I been like true to my word and have I been following through on this?" So again, it's those ideas of like deadlines and accountability can be just so helpful in these areas.
Yeah, and I think I used to fall into this, Aaron and I did, where like having a date night doesn't necessarily need to be anything extravagant. At the end of like your date night could be what probably most people think of, like, oh, we're going to go out to dinner together, whatnot, sit down, have a conversation, hopefully stay off of your phones and whatnot. But date night doesn't have to be that. It could be we're going to take a walk around our neighborhood together and just talk. And or it could be we're going to go, sit at a park and watch the sunset somewhere or go
Yep.
walk on a trail. Like it doesn't have to be something where you're spending a bunch of money. It doesn't have to be something where you're traveling very far away from your home necessarily, depending on the other commitments that you've got going on. it's literally just you're setting aside a time to be with one another and have those conversations. And I think it's hard to do in our busy, constantly inundated world where we're just on from one thing to the next, and there's constantly notifications and distractions battling with all of us for our attention. And you just got to turn off that noise and spend that time together.
Yeah. 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 Keep it simple, right? And there's definitely some merit to that. One other thing that I think would be worth mentioning, again, for the benefit of like, if there are other people out there listening who are struggling with this, one of the other very common themes that we have seen emerging, particularly I would say over the last 6 months or so, is like career transitions.
Hmm.
The economy right now is in a really uncertain place. There's a lot of turmoil happening for a whole variety of reasons. And, there are several members of the group who are, dealing with things like maybe they've been laid off, maybe they've been given a sort of off ramp of like X number of months until, we're closing this office down and you got to find something else. Maybe they've got a wife who was laid off. There's a lot of that happening right now. And, we're doing our best as a group to support those men in, offering any sort of guidance or tips or just words of encouragement as they go through that incredibly difficult process of navigating a career transition, during midlife when you have all these responsibilities.
Hmm.
Um, but I just mentioned that again because I think it's really helpful for people just to understand that if you're struggling with that or uncertainty about your career, your vocation, you're definitely not alone. There's a lot of that going on right now as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've heard that a few times. And if it wasn't the person that's in the group, maybe their spouse is going through something like that, the layoffs or having to transition their career. And it's definitely a challenge. It's like many of the people in the group, I don't think this is surprising that these individuals would find themselves in a similar place. But many of the people in the group are people that are not from here, right? They're people that have moved here to the Denver area from out of town, and they don't have that circle of people that's been established ever since they were kids in high school and whatnot. And they're trying to meet people in midlife. Maybe they're going through transitions like this in midlife, and yeah, it can be challenging. And it's nice to know that other people are going through it, and then you just never know. I like the phrase, your network is your net worth, where you just don't know who the other people in the group are going to know. Like maybe somebody in the group knows somebody who has a position available, and that's like the perfect opportunity for someone else to take or to jump on. So I think just having these conversations, sharing where you're at, and letting other people open up their network to you too can be very valuable.
Yeah, yeah. The networking I think is huge, and also just like sharing tips and strategies. Like I'm just hearing, and I'm so grateful that I'm not in this position right now, and not knock on wood because it can happen to any of us. But being out there navigating a career transition right now, I'm hearing from men that are sending out, sometimes dozens or even hundreds of resumes and getting like no responses, right? So the traditional means of searching for a job and career, I think, are falling apart a little bit. It feels like, and so you have to think creatively. And I've been part of several side conversations where people are trading ideas of like, hey, here's what I'm doing to kind of network and build those connections or build my personal brand and so just having sounding boards to bounce those ideas off of when you're dealing with these really common challenges, I think is something that I hope the group can continue to do more and more of, moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What let me ask you another question here, Jason. In trying to get the group together, I think there's pretty good traction, it feels like now. Like the group is starting to gel. Some of the same people have been there multiple times. Relationships are forming. But over the past 12 plus months since you started this, what have you found to be some of like the most challenging pieces of like getting this group going and getting this group off the ground? There might be somebody listening to this podcast who doesn't live here in the Denver area, doesn't have the ability to come check us out, or it wouldn't be realistic for them to come join us on a regular basis, but they want to find something like this where they are, or maybe they don't find something and they want to start something like this
Hmm.
in their community. What have you found to be some of the challenges of getting this group kind of going?
Yeah. Yeah. I will mention that, it's Pillars of Impact right now is a kind of a Denver based thing, but I do have ambitions to grow it. In fact, one of our kind of original members, and one of our core
Yeah.
guys is getting ready to move. And he's moving to Florida, and he and I have had a couple conversations about starting a chapter down there, and so I think that would be super cool. And I would love, if anyone is out there listening in a different area outside of Denver and is interested in leaning in, I definitely would love to talk because a lot of the challenges are around just building the sort of structure, I guess, and scaffolding for like, well, what is this group? What's the identity? What are we here to talk about? What do the agendas look like? There was a lot of like figuring out that I had to do to get that up and running. I'm still figuring it out, right? It's still a pretty new group, and in some respects, we're building the plane in the air, and not ashamed of that. I'm proud of that. We're being iterative and experimental with this. Beyond that, big challenges are pretty like prosaic, I would say, in the sense that like there's nothing too exotic here. The biggest challenges that I've faced are like finding venues
Yeah.
to meet, and we've been really lucky to find a couple of great places that we cycle through. One of them is a clubhouse at a really nice kind of apartment complex that's located here in the area. They've got a beautiful clubhouse with lots of comfortable seating, and we're able to meet there regularly. So we do that. And other than that, there's a Prost, a beer garden that we like to meet at. They've got lots of big tables and seating that can they can kind of accommodate larger groups. And so those have been some challenges as well, just figuring out the logistics and places to meet. And then, early on, I think we we struggled to figure out like how to deal with kind of larger numbers of people. So there is, I would say, kind of a sweet spot to these sorts of conversations when you want to dive in and get a little bit deeper. Once you get over, I would say 6 to 8 people, and you get these larger groups of 10, 12, we've had meetings where there's 15 or 16 people there. That can be a little bit, it changes the dynamic, I would say, of the conversation. So figuring out different ways of like structuring the meetings to accommodate different sizes of groups. You don't always know exactly how many people are going to show up
Yeah.
ahead of time. And so you have to figure that out. So just kind of throwing yourself out there if you're thinking of starting one of these groups and like being comfortable with the fact that you're just not going to know everything and you're not going to be totally comfortable going into it. And what you need is pretty simple, is just you know, a basic agenda and a venue, get the word out there, and then a willingness to be a little bit uncomfortable and be a little bit vulnerable to bring people together. And I think what you'll find is that people are going to lean in and be supportive and want it to work, and it's going to be a collaborative team effort. But you do have to have some of those basic building blocks in place. Again, a venue, some way to get the word out, and somebody willing to kind of lean in and moderate and facilitate the discussions.
Yeah, totally. And I think all of us appreciate like your willingness to moderate and facilitate them. And, if somebody needs to kind of be the first one to share that vulnerability or whatnot, you're always quick to jump in and say, "Hey, I'll start this conversation off if necessary." One of the other things I think that was a recent, relatively recent, but also a good change is we talked about that this group is geared around fathers, and we talked about how we all have extremely busy schedules, right? Kids have schedules, families have schedules. You've got your work schedule, like whatever that is, or your personal things. We don't all have the same bedtimes and whatnot, but we've tried to structure the timing of these conversations like kind of around what can be slightly more easily accommodated by people's schedules. One, we're not doing it weekly. Not that we're discouraging people from meeting weekly. There are some people within the group that kind of are meeting up additionally throughout the month, grabbing coffee and
Hmm.
whatnot, which is awesome. But we're having like the more formalized, kind of structured meetings 1 to 2 times a month. And we recently made the change to move those back to a start time of 7:30, just to try to accommodate like attending of family dinners, wrapping up of kids' activities in the evening, potentially, like in my case, potentially putting your really young kids down to bed and then being able to shoot over to the meeting. So I think that was a change that I think we've seen the numbers of attendance actually bump up just a little bit since we bumped the meeting back just a touch,
Hmm.
because it's a little, though it can lead to a potentially later night depending on what somebody's bedtime is. It's not like you're doing that, numerous times a week or anything like that. It's just
Yeah.
1 or 2 nights a month, and it allows people to wrap up their personal responsibilities or family responsibilities they've got to do, to then be able to come to this and just be focused on being there and being present with the group.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely been helpful. And I would say even a broader point around that is just like, listening to the group, right? And listening to feedback. And obviously you can't accommodate everybody because we all have very different schedules and different sort of requirements. But assessing for patterns, I'm a product guy at work. I do product work for a living. And so a lot of that's about, taking feedback in, assessing for patterns, figuring out what to adjust and what to kind of maybe put in a backlog or ignore. And ultimately, there was definitely enough feedback around that very early on of like, hey, let's experiment with the meeting times. And I think where we've landed now of this kind of 7:30 meeting time is great for dads. Like you said, that extra, even between 7 and 7:30, that extra 30 minutes just gives people time to wind up the, soccer and gymnastics and getting the kids to bed and all of these other things. And then ultimately, something else to think about is like staggering different nights of the week. So what I'm trying to do right now is have every other week to have a meeting where we come together, but like doing my best to not do those on the same night of the week because, you know, I've heard from people of like, hey, unfortunately, Wednesdays don't work for me anymore because my daughter has gymnastics, right? So like have one meeting on a Wednesday and another on a Tuesday or a Thursday if I can do it. And sometimes my availability can limit that as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, that is another one of just the big challenges that I should have mentioned is just it's not just the venue, but just the scheduling.
Yep,
It can be really difficult because you have to juggle it. If you're the one leading this group, you have to juggle your own availability, but also try to do it in ways that work for, as many different members of your group as possible. So that can be a bit of a juggling act as well.
for sure. And I mean, I think like you said, taking the feedback and making little adjustments because ultimately you could, if this was something you were really interested in, or any topic you were really interested in, you could kind of like paralyze yourself from even getting started by trying to make it perfect from day one. And it's not going to be perfect. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be perfect from day one or ever. And just getting something rolling, adjusting as necessary to try to accommodate the best that you can. I think that's been huge because a lot of times we get frozen by wanting things to be perfect and then we don't take any action, and
Hmm.
don't take any action, well, you're not going to have any results. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a big point that you made there. um there was something else that I was going to ask you. You mentioned that there's potential opportunity for this to continue to grow and expand. And then, of course, if anybody is here local to the Denver area, especially if you're on the south side of town, just logistically speaking, man, I would encourage you guys to come check this out or reach out to one of us if this sounds like something you'd be interested in being a part of or getting involved with. Um, while we're on that topic, Jason, before we do start the process of wrapping things up, what's going to be the best way? We'll put this all in the show notes. Where can people find information on
Yeah.
Pillars
Yeah.
of Impact?
Yeah, so website is up at pillarsofimpact.com. It's actually great timing. I've been doing a little bit of work on that. Again, juggling, spinning lots of different plates in my life, and I'm trying to get this website built up over time. So I actually just added an about page with an FAQ. I've got an events page coming soon. And then there's a detailed homepage that kind of just talks at a high level about the mission and the values of the group, as well as, of course, a place to drop your email in and receive updates about all of our future events. I would say as far as, expansion of the group, um, if anybody's interested in joining, either starting a group or coming and joining ours, shoot me an email, jason@pillarsofimpact.com, is the best way to get a hold of me. And ultimately right now, like I mentioned, I do want to expand and grow the group. I've been really focused on kind of quality over quantity, I would say, over the last year, not aggressively trying to promote and grow the group because I feel like we've had a good core and we've been really trying to get into a rhythm and figure out, what's our identity? What do we want this group to look like? I do feel like we're at a place now where it would make sense to start, scaling it up a little bit. And specifically, I'm very interested in around the Denver area. So we're here in Highlands Ranch, but like, there's Lone Tree and there's Parker and there's Littleton and there's all these other areas around where I feel like that would be a great way to expand because these chapters could have their own like meetings, but then if we wanted to bring everybody together for larger events, it would be local here. But honestly, if anyone is listening in other markets as well outside of the state of Colorado and is interested in starting a group, a lot of the frameworks in place, and I would definitely be interested in chatting and collaborating about that because I think there's something really special that we're doing at Pillars of Impact, and
Mm,
I'd love to see that branch out and help help more men, all over the country.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think all that sounds phenomenal, what you just said. And I want to give you an opportunity to put a little plug in. I've been quite impressed. I really appreciate you doing this. If anyone's interested in like signing up for these and subscribing, Jason, you're running an awesome newsletter and you're sending out some impactful emails on a regular cadence. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So I do have the Impactful Ideas newsletter. It's a bit of a, I would say, a companion to the Pillars of Impact group. It can be found at newsletter.pillarsofimpact.com if you're interested in signing up for that. So that is a separate email list from the events sign up that's on the main page. But if you're interested, it's a weekly newsletter, and I'm an avid consumer of information and specifically books. I'm a big reader. I've always got one or two books going. And what I try to do with the Pillars of Impact newsletter is distill down like bite-sized wisdom and insights from books that I'm reading that can really help us become, better husbands, better fathers, better leaders. So I try to make those pretty bite-sized. They're all very structured. They start out with kind of in a nutshell, a few bullet points about what the idea is that I'm going to talk about, so you can kind of skim that and decide if you want to read further. Then I dive deeper into the ideas, give some key takeaways at the end, as well as some prompts for reflection. So they all follow this format, really aimed at trying to make it very digestible and easy to consume. And I have a ton of fun putting those together. I'm a big believer in the power of ideas. The right ideas have really helped me lead a more impactful life, from getting sober, which I did 6 years ago, something I've shared with the group numerous times. Um, Transforming my career, building a stronger relationship with my wife. All of these things start as an idea, right? And I think if we can really tap into the power of ideas, of course, they have to be coupled with action as well. But the power of ideas to really just get us thinking about things in different ways is something that I'm just a big, big believer in. And so I love sharing those out every week. And I've gotten some great feedback on that newsletter as well.
Yeah, yeah, I really like it. I appreciate you sending those out. Sometimes I'm a week or two behind reading them, but I don't delete them from my inbox. They're there waiting to be read till
Awesome. Love
when I
that.
can get to it. So, um, Jason, I know we've both got meetings coming up at the top of the hour, and I want to give you a few minutes of your time back. Did we miss anything that you really wanted to like make sure we close out with before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think we missed anything, but I would just close out by kind of looping back to this idea of connection. This is really such an important theme through everything that we're doing. And I think in today's day and age, for all sorts of different reasons, like it's more important than ever, I would say, to have that supportive network around you. And like we talked about at the very beginning of this interview, if you're not purposeful about creating that as a middle-aged father, it's just not going to happen. Like it's one of those things in life where there's just too much gravity kind of pulling you into these other things that are very important. Work and parenting and marriage and all of that are hugely important, but they're going to not leave a lot of space for like social connection and having peer relationships. And I think, I will share that like I said, I'm a big reader, and I went on a kick recently of reading a bunch of books about like healthful aging, longevity, these sorts of ideas. And one of the things that comes up in these books over and over again is the importance of a strong social network
Yeah.
and connection. And I think, again, perversely a bit at middle age, like is the time where we should really be investing in building that relationship, but it's all in those relationships, but it's also the time when it's the most difficult to do that. And so I think having some sort of forcing function in your life of like creating those connections and almost forcing you to get out there and be a little bit more networked and plugged in, I think is really important. So whether you're in the Denver area and thinking about joining a group, want to come check us out, or maybe you're thinking about starting your own somewhere else, I think just do it. Like the world needs more of this.
Yeah. Yeah, you're 100% right. I hear it. Like I'm fortunate to have one of those types of careers and vocations where I do get to work with people in a, one-on-one in-person capacity. So, we get to build relationships with our clients here in the physical therapy setting. But I hear from people because of that, because of the conversations we're having, the challenges that they're dealing with, and exactly that area that you're talking about, like truly connecting with people. Everything is so digital. I think the power and the impact of these types of groups is so profound if you really just put the intention in and go do it. So I'm glad that I showed up several months ago to come check out the group, and I'll see you at the meeting there tomorrow. And all of you guys that are tuning into listening, just go do it. Go check out a group of your own. Go start one if there's not one. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, and reach out to us if you have questions. But speaking of impact, I mean, if you've listened to this show before, the code, you've heard me say this. Reviews are so impactful to help us get this conversation and these episodes out to more and more people. Hopefully, you're finding a lot of value in these conversations, whether they're interview or solo. So if you've not left a review on this podcast, I would really encourage you to go do that now on whatever platform you're listening on. And just thank you for doing that. Jason, we'll put all that information in the show notes so people can find your contact information, Pillars of Impact contact information. And I just, again, really appreciate you carving out the time to do this conversation with me and joining us here on the code.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, you guys, I hope to catch you guys on another episode of the code. And Jason, I'll see you tomorrow, brother. Signing
All right,
off.
take care.